All of our lives, from the time we're old enough to reason, to think, each of us have chosen heroes. And it is a rare thing indeed when we have the opportunity as adults to honor our heroes. That happens tonight for John Denver and Tom Crum and so many others who were touched by the love and the wisdom, the intellect of Buckminster Fuller. Matthew Fox talked about this morning when he said, perhaps the most significant prayer is this simple thank you. That's what is going to happen tonight. So without further ado, here's John Denver.
How many people know who Dr. Buckminster Fuller is? Yeah, I'm in the right place. Bucky Fuller, Grandpa Bucky, has more... It's raining. Oh, a blessing on our day. Although earlier we sang the storm away. Remember when it got real windy, the kids came in, there was a wall of water right on the other side of town, stopped, dissipated from all the energy here. Excuse me. Bucky Fuller has more written about him in Who's Who than any other human being. Bucky Fuller is the most built architect in the world. As of 1981, his invention, the geodesic dome, has been built over 300,000 times. Bucky Fuller was awarded over 50 honorary degrees from learning institutions around the world. Known as the planet's friendly genius, coining the phrase spaceship Earth, Bucky Fuller will be remembered as having made tremendous contributions to the well-being of humanity and this planet. Bucky was one of my first heroes as a student of architecture in Texas so very long ago. And I had the opportunity to meet Bucky for the first time at a conversation he held at the behest of Werner Erhard out in California. And it was a casual meeting. There were a lot of other people there, but somehow a connection was made. Bucky had this way of looking at you through those big glasses that magnified his eyes, and when he couldn't say anything, there was a way that he looked at you that could move you to tears, and an incredible bond was created. The next time that I saw Bucky, I had done given a speech at Kansas State University when I was on President Carter's Commission on World and Domestic Hunger. And I'd come back into Colorado. I had heard that he was giving a speech down in Denver along with Amory Lovins, another friend of Windstar. And I wanted to go by and see him. And there, also to hear Amory Lovins, if I remember correctly, Tom Crum was there, David Randall, who at that time was working with Windstar, was there. And we ended up having lunch with Bucky. And at this lunch, he asked me to join him on stage. And I was happy to do whatever he wanted me to do. And Bucky, when he talked, would sit down. And he had me sitting over here. And there were 3,000 people there in the audience, if I remember correctly, but it felt to me, it seemed like he was talking to me the whole time. And after that talk, we visited again, and I asked Bucky, Tom and I told him a little bit about Windstar and what we were doing, and somehow he got very, very excited about it, and I asked him if he would like to fly up here to Aspen with us the next morning, and that perhaps we could introduce him to Windstar and to the staff. And he said yes. Out of nowhere, this man who spent so much time on the road, who wrote half of his books in airports waiting for planes, somehow in the moment came up here to Aspen. And that evening we invited the entire Windstar staff and the members of the board of advisors and directors who were here to come over to my home, and Bucky spoke to us about 4 hours that night. An incredibly unforgettable evening. The next morning, Bucky and I sat and talked for about an hour and a half, 2 hours. I can't say we talked, he talked to me. And Medard Gable, who was traveling with him at that time, said, you know, I've never heard Bucky talk like that to anyone. And most of what he said to you, I've never heard him say before. And it really was like, it brought to fruition, in a sense, to realness, all of these things that I had felt about him and why he was a hero to me. Tom and I were talking earlier, and he mentioned another occasion when Bucky was out at Windstar and sat down with Tom one morning and said, Tom, read this. Read it aloud. And he gave Tom a sheet of paper, something he had written down, and Tom read it out loud, and Bucky looked at it with his childlike face and these beautiful eyes, and he said, isn't that brilliant? With such innocence and such grace and awareness that it was coming through him, you know. And he said, now we've got to go up and show that to John. Well, I was still in bed when they arrived. And they woke me up. I was there in my pajamas, and he said, read this. Read it out loud. And I read it, and he said the same thing. Isn't that brilliant? And for me, you know, it's like sometimes in reading Bucky's books and his words, you can take one of his sentences and spend about a half an hour with it before you can really get everything that's in there. Truly, one of the most incredible things that has happened to me in a very, very rich and wonderful life was the great privilege and honor of knowing Bucky and spending time with him. On his 85th birthday, he was out at Windstar, and I wrote a song for him, which I'm going to do a little bit later on. When he passed away, I was honored to be asked to sing that at the gathering to celebrate his life. I say in the song, and I wanted to say to you, that he was everything that I aspire to be. The man that he was, the child that he was, the friend that he was, the gift that he was, the grandfather of the future. What a privilege to have known him. I'd like to invite Tom Crum out to share a few thoughts about Bucky. Tom?
Bucky Fuller. Excuse me, I'm not trying to be Rolland Smith here. Be my new health talk. Eat right, stay fit, die anyway. He didn't impact people. He like planted a tattoo on your heart. He was just an amazing, amazing man. Are you like me, don't you have an affinity with really crazy people? Have you ever noticed that? It's like that old bag lady, that famous bag lady named Trudy in New York. She said, not everybody can be crazy. Most people can't cope. And it was that quote that set me on creating a Lovable Lunatics Club. Lovable Lunatics. Bucky is chairman of the board. What I mean by lunatic is like we all get to the edge in life somehow through our family struggles or our business struggles or our health struggles. And when we get to the edge, most of us sort of hang on to those stories. But there's a very few people that have the courage to leap. They look back at the normative system from which those stories emerged, and they look at their own life, and then they look at their heart and where they really want to be, and they leap. And they don't fall, they fly. And they don't just fly anywhere, they fly back to the world from which they came, and they create real chaos that makes a difference. And Bucky was like that. Bucky Fuller, you know, when you watch some of the video of him you're going to see, I don't know whether you'll understand everything he says. I don't know if that is all that important. I think what you'll get when you watch Bucky, in fact, you could fall asleep and still get Bucky. As John says, he's written books in only 1 or 2 sentences. But there's something about what he transmits that's very, very powerful. It's his compassion and his love, not just his brilliance. And Bucky wasn't always a lunatic, a lovable lunatic. He was just a mess like you and I are a lot of the time. But something happened. And we all have interesting stories. Bucky had a very powerful one. You know, Bucky made lots of mistakes in his life. He got thrown, you know, it was like listening to Robert Kiyosaki today. Bucky got thrown out of Harvard twice. Every time they invited him back, he'd go to New York, he'd spend all his money on a chorus line from a New York show, and they threw him out again. That's when he had that lunatic potential. I knew it. But what happened with Bucky, and I'm sure so many of you have heard this story before, is that he proceeded to continue injuring himself and others in some way. He became an alcoholic. He made a tragic mistake by getting into his father-in-law's business, failed in that. He used to go up to Harvard and Yale games or football games and get drunk. And he'd start on Friday night and he wouldn't come back to Philadelphia where he lived until Monday morning. One day before a Harvard and Yale football game, his little girl was very sick. His little girl was the one precious jewel in his life at this time. And just before he left, his little girl at her bedside said, "Bucky, would you please bring me one of those pennants?" They had these beautiful little pennants in those days, wooden pennants. And would you bring me one? Bucky said, of course. He went to the game, proceeded to get drunk, stayed drunk, was still there Sunday, was still there Monday morning, got an urgent call from his family, asking them to return home. His daughter was very sick. Got himself together enough to get back to Philadelphia. He went to his daughter's bedside. And what do you think were her first words? "Daddy, did you bring me my pennant?" And what did he answer? No. And she died during that illness. Now, I don't know what it is for us to make steps forward in our lives, but this was a very powerful blow to Bucky. It was sort of the final step in which he let go of hanging on. And he proceeded to go into a deeper depression. Then he was going to commit suicide. And it was in his 30s. Here's a man, he's a mess. He's in his 30s. He's ready to commit suicide. And you got all the reasons. It's understandable. And then it occurred to him that he need not be another bridge dropping or street splattering. Instead, he could commit ego suicide. He could do it eloquently. He could kill the stuff and the stories in him that kept him from really serving. And he made a major commitment, and he honored it from center, moment by moment, to live his life as a servant of the principles of the universe. And he didn't do it right away. It was, again, a step-by-step process. He recognized that everything he said came out of a reflection of the normative system from which he came. So his first criteria or requirement or discipline for himself was to stay quiet and to not speak until, when he spoke, it was real and authentic, came from his heart. So now he's with his wife in a Chicago tenement. How long did he stay silent before he found something worthy of saying that came from his heart? 2 years. That's commitment. And what emerged is this amazing being who touched us all. A founding father, of course, Windstar, but a person who just meant so much to so many and continues to do so to this day. And Bucky understood the joy of service. So be comfortable when you listen to him. And if you're having difficulty understanding some of the tapes, if the sound quality is not there, just relax. You'll get it anyway. Just know who this person was. I'll just end by quoting a poet, the poet Tagore, who really speaks to me about what Bucky represents. He says, I slept and dreamt that life was joy. I awoke and saw that life was service. I acted, and behold, service was joy. Bucky was joy, and it came from his ability to serve. Thank you.
One of the first little pieces of video we'd like to share with you was an incredible moment. I mentioned earlier in our symposium this weekend of a dear friend, Swami Muktananda from India, who has had at that time millions of followers around the world. And I happened to be in Los Angeles recording an album, knew that Bucky was there, and had the notion of getting Bucky, who in my feeble brain epitomized Western thinking, and this little man, Muktananda, who epitomized Eastern spirituality, and who I knew were both talking about the same thing and saying the same thing from totally opposite ends of the spectrum, and endeavored to put them together, and we were able to capture that moment on video. And if you can watch this, you'll see what occurred. One of the things, they exchanged thoughts, they had some ideas, and through the interpreter at that time, who was a young lady whose name at that time was Malti, who is now known as Guru Mai, Baba's successor, I guess is one word. Baba gave Bucky a gift, which was a tradition in meetings of this kind, and Bucky didn't have a gift in return, so he sat down very quickly and wrote out a mathematical formula, 71 integers long, that resolves all calculations in whole numbers. Just a little thing while we're here. So if you could run the video, please.
The same thing.
Yes, happiness and beauty is a result of the truth.
The consequence. How did it go?
Yeah. For me, I love you both so very much, and I know that you know each other through your experience of the universe, through Baba's consciousness. I'm very happy to be able to have you spend a short time together. It pleases me greatly.
I have a lot of respect for you. The moment I saw you, I felt a lot of respect for you.
I feel very deep respect for him.
I have to tear open a person to see how he is. The face gives away the whole thing.
The eyes of all the faces, the eyes.
I'm very happy to meet you.
We'd like to, it's a mathematical statement.
गणित का रूप से उसने जो संशोधन किया है
A very long number here.
ये नंबर इतना लंबा है
71 integer number.
इसमें 71 नंबर है
This is a number that makes possible doing all scientific calculations, and all answers come out whole number. To make that my present for him.
We would like you to say, look here. Here.
No, look into Baba's eyes.
हो गया ये सामने देखो
As you just heard, yes. As you just heard, Bucky decided to commit ego suicide. Since he did not belong to himself, he belonged to the universe. Therefore, he committed himself to working to the highest advantage of everybody. Not just his family or team or community or country, but everybody. He then discovered that by committing himself to the highest advantage of all others, he became more effective. He also discovered that these decisions of his allowed the principles of universe to come through that would otherwise have been unavailable to him had he been simply busy earning a living. He never wanted others to praise or eulogize him. If he were here tonight, he might say, and I quote, "When you hear Beethoven's Fifth, Beethoven lives. When you say the word atom, Democritus lives." In that spirit, Bucky is here tonight. Not only in the videos you're about to see, but through the lives of people that he touched. The majority of the video that you will see tonight comes from an event held almost 10 years ago to the day in Kirkwood Meadows, California. The place was the Berkman Business School. The event was the Future of Business. Other video tonight is courtesy of the Buckminster Fuller Institute. Bucky, in his later years, was hard of hearing. Therefore, sometimes his speech is hard to understand. So try to listen carefully. It is our feeling that if you are open and willing, the resonance of his words may change your life.
At this moment, I'm just going to repeat, I've been repeating it several times, we're not running the universe. And if we're behaving pretty well, we're liable to stay here. I'm sure you're beginning to get that feeling from me. I couldn't be more average human being. And if anybody, I don't know anybody who made so many mistakes I have, but if I have somebody to say to us, did I learn from those mistakes? But I keep watching myself, I keep making mistakes. I see a beautiful girl and I fall in love. And I have to realize that God has decided there's more important things to be done. I'm still very, very alive at 86, I'll show you.
Jamie Snyder is Bucky's grandson. He is also director of the Buckminster Fuller Institute and traveled with Bucky often in the later years of Bucky's lecture circuit. Please welcome Jamie Snyder.
Hi. I can't see you out there so well. Can we get any more house lights, or does that throw everything off momentarily? Great. Naturally, I'm very excited and honored to be invited to participate here with you. I actually just got here a few hours ago, unfortunately, but I've been hearing wonderful stories of the whole weekend, and I'm very thrilled about what's taken place here and what it represents for humanity. I'm also, of course, excited. It's fun to be involved in a tribute to Bucky. And I guess as I've been thinking about this moment and what I have to say to you, a number of thoughts have been coming through to me, important things I want to share. First thing is, Bucky himself, as you probably will get a sense from these videotapes, wasn't big on tooting his own horn. And in fact, as I think Tom said very eloquently, it was a kind of an ego suicide that he went through. And so being born his grandson, which naturally was a very great privilege, he often extended a number of his disciplines to things that he would encourage me to do, or he felt that perhaps I automatically fell within the disciplines that he found worked for him. And so he would often be uncomfortable in a situation if I were ever to toot his horn, just because I was family, and that's how it goes, I guess. So I kind of been thinking about that tonight, and in a way, I guess it feels kind of fitting in a way to this evening to echo that sentiment, because I feel from what's already been said, and certainly what I learned from Bucky in his life, that the real tribute here tonight is something much greater than Bucky. It's certainly very important in life to acknowledge those individuals on whose shoulders we have all stood. And I certainly have stood on Bucky's shoulders as much as anybody. However, it's also important to remember that the ideas that Bucky's talked about in these videos, the ideas that those of you who are familiar with his work, many of the ideas that he spoke about in his life were really ideas that have been spoken about through the ages in one way or another. Of course, there was a lot of new invention and new information, but certainly a number of the basic principles of service to others, I would say, have been tried and tested throughout the ages. And I think it's one of the most wonderful acknowledgments, really beyond anything that we can give to him in our thanks, is just the acknowledgement of the reality of all of us and our commitment to this planet, and our commitment, and hopefully growing commitment, to service. I feel very honored to be in the company of Lester Brown and some of the other individuals here who are doing tremendous work. And while I haven't met all of you in person, I feel very honored to be with you. But I think it's really, really important as we listen to all these tapes and hear people talking that we keep reading between the lines to hear those things that Bucky says that are really principles, that are really true for all of us, and to not necessarily focus so much on Bucky the personality. I actually, during my little brief moment here, feel in that spirit, I actually kind of want to acknowledge a few different people in addition to you. And you know, it's hard to imagine, but growing up with Bucky, I certainly got the feeling that of the world that he was born into, the world of our forefathers and mothers. I certainly got the feeling that in 1927, when he began his own life experiment, I got the feeling that the world was really a very different place. And I really got the feeling very clearly that the idea of individuals fundamentally committing their lives to the world, to something larger than themselves, to service, I really could see from what he told me that that world was very different, and that idea wasn't very popular, and that there really weren't a lot of individuals everywhere who had that as their primary focus. And it's certainly understandable as we look back in history how we got that, how it's evolved in that direction. But it's certainly a very remarkable moment and tribute to see growing before us and before our eyes. I think something much more important than anything externally is the very large commitment that is growing amongst individuals in this world. People, many people in all different kinds of walks of lives who have really made it a priority to put the earth, God, the universe, something larger than themselves before them. And I think it's also important, as you listen to the tapes and as we acknowledge Bucky, that we remember that that's really what we're acknowledging. We're really acknowledging that principle. We're acknowledging the principle that when you commit yourself to others, you will be fulfilled in the greatest way. We all will be fulfilled in the greatest way, and our planet will be fulfilled in the greatest way. So, I'm going to, I guess, also acknowledge, sort of go out a step here a little bit, just because, and this isn't on the program, but I very much wanted to acknowledge John Denver and Tom Crum, and I know this is out of step, but if you guys are back there, can you come out here for a moment? Where are you? Can you come up here for just a second? I know that's kind of, huh? Do you have to? Yes. Well, a lot has to be said. Stay up here for just a second, but these two individuals done much, obviously, that you know about, and much in a service that I think is only now beginning to be appreciated in the way it really should, in having founded this wonderful Windstar. And my personal tribute is just really to thank you both for your very extensive and dedicated love and dedication to Bucky, and more importantly to what he was really about, and the very beautiful way that you expressed it in your lives and your work. And so, God bless you. So let's see. I think now what I'd like to do is, just in a moment, we're going to look at a little bit more videotape, and I guess what I'd like to do is just set this up. Most of these clips were from a series of programs that Bucky did in the last few months of his life, and these programs were entitled Integrity Days. The name for those programs actually came from a meeting I'd had with Bucky. He had had a hip operation, and right very close to the end of his life, he felt he could extend his life a little longer and be a little more use if he got his hip replaced, even though it was a little bit risky with his heart. But he went ahead and did it, and thank goodness it did give him a few more years without so much pain. But one day, towards the end of this operation, he was kind of coming back to, with all the sedatives they give you, he was kind of in a expanded kind of state, and it took him a number of days to integrate in. It was one of the most unusual times I had with Bucky. You wouldn't believe what he said when I got into the hospital the first time, but in any event, well, I'll tell you the fun part. That is, one morning, I was pretty much going in every day, and he asked me to come down to the hospital and bring a tape recorder, and because he had something really important, he had this dream, and I got down there and I had my tape recorder and I started playing it, and he was just lying in bed, and he said, well, I had this dream last night, and this dream, there was a big circle of all these people in my life, and we were having a conversation, and he didn't really go into all the details. There wasn't a lot of detail about what exactly the conversation was and who the people were, but they were obviously people that he cared a lot about and people that he felt closely aligned with. And he said, and then he began to talk about this very moving experience that had come from that dream of kind of realizing as he approached the end of his life that very deeply that the most needed ingredient on our planet, now that we really have the potential, the real potential exists right now to take care of our planet, to take care of 100% of humanity. That exists right now, and as some of the great reports that have been done by the scientists have said, the only missing ingredient is the social and political will to bring these things about. And so he said his own conclusion was that the most important ingredient that was going to be necessary for us to break through and to really fulfill the potential we have was not going to come from the political institutions or the social institutions or the religious institutions or the economic institutions, but rather the institution of individuals, and in fact really the integrity of individuals. Whether we really demonstrate enough integrity on our planet, that was going to make it or break it. And so in any event, we decided to do a series of events focusing on the subject of integrity, and these programs, which took place the last few months of his life, or these few little clips, are from those integrity days. So.
How would you, right now in your life, define integrity?
I find that I have to use the word courage due to the circumstances of humanity. The courage to cooperate or initiate based entirely on truth, all the truth, nothing but the truth, as the divine mind within you tells you the truth is. So it really does require a courage and a self-disciplining to go along with that truth. And that's the way I define it. As of 1970, keeping track of all the environment controlling, all the logistics of thinking about total planet, spaceship Earth, 1970, we passed a threshold where it could be demonstrated engineering-wise that we took all the metals going into armaments and put them into what are called livingry instead of killingry, that within the design revolution of only 10 years, we could have all humanity living at the highest standard of living anybody ever known on a completely sustainable basis while phasing out forever all further use of fossil fuels and atomic energy. We could live entirely on an energy income. And this is absolutely clear. In 1970, we passed that threshold. For the first time in world history, I knew it did not have to be you or me. That war was obsolete. Many, many times in history, been clearly nowhere nearly enough to go around. All kinds of circumstances which that could occur. And if you were, there were also many times when that occurred that there were a great many people who were dying and would like to get out of the game. And I said, under those circumstances, I can see how it was really integrity for a head of a healthy family to look out for his family, to be, otherwise you could really find selfishness could be rationalized under conditions of where there's nowhere nearly enough to go around, and you're looking out for your family. You say God gave you that responsibility, and you think your whole family are really worthy of those to be survivors. I also said that when we get to a point where we now know on our planet, as I've been trying to make very clear, that it is now enough to go around for everybody to live at the highest standard of living ever had. Therefore, from now on, selfishness is no longer integrity.
If you knew this was your last few hours on this planet Earth, what would you be doing?
Darling, I never asked myself such questions.
I'm asking.
So I don't have any hypotheticals like that.
What message would
I hope that up to the last second I'm here, I'll be doing what I'm doing now with you.
I have just one other part of this, my tribute, and that has to do with Bucky's wife, Anne, my grandmother, when Bucky died in 1983, they had been married almost 66 years. And there's no question in my experience in my life that what a absolutely remarkable and profound backing she gave to him, and courage and conviction to do what he was doing, which took a lot of perseverance. And it was really profound the way their lives ended. Actually, this video that you saw, and I'll show you just one other short clip in a moment, this video was taken, as it said, 6 days before Bucky died. 2 days before that, he had been at a conference in Paris giving a talk. In the morning, got on the Concorde, flew to Washington, got in a helicopter and flew to the White House where he gave a talk at lunch. After lunch, got back in a plane and flew to Chicago where he gave a dinner talk. And then the next day flew to Los Angeles to get ready for this all-day program that took place in Huntington Beach. Now, my grandmother actually had been in the hospital for a number of months. She had had a surgery, which went very well, but herself being almost 88 years old and about 88 pounds probably, it was a little bit getting her strength back. And so when Bucky came back off the plane, he had heard from the doctors that she had had kind of a setback, and so that was very much on his mind as he gave this talk. So why don't we roll the clip, and then I'll close with one other comment.
I said I didn't sleep very well. I kept seemingly, are we both supposed to die at the same time? There's some hysteria going on. Maybe it's so.
Anyway, I guess the tape gives the punchline, but in any event, they actually did die within 36 hours of each other. And as it turned out, it was like many things, I guess when you get in harmony with God and with the principles of the universe, life just is harmonious, synchronized. And Bucky came down to the hospital Friday morning, I think it was, and it was that morning that the doctor actually told us that Ann had been in a coma for a few days, and the doctor actually told Bucky and my mother that he just didn't feel there was any chance that Ann was going to come out of that coma. And so I went down to lunch, had lunch with him, went off to do an errand, and on my way back, he had had a heart attack sitting at her bedside, and passed away about 2 hours later. And then she never did regain consciousness and died 36 hours later. So it was a very eloquent and elegant completion to a wonderful experiment of human being. They didn't have to witness each other in person. I guess they both got to the other side first somehow. So anyway, that's all I have to say. It's really an honor to be with you, and I'm looking forward to the other presenters, and God bless you all.
The spirit of Bucky still lives. It lives through his work and through the lives of the people he has touched. One such person is James Kramer. He is the Executive Vice President and CEO of the American Institute of Architects. Please welcome James Kramer.
Well, you can get a good feeling from what has been said of the great, strong moral purpose that Bucky brought to the world. And I'd like to share with you for just a few very brief moments how he was so influential, perhaps more than any other person in this century, on the profession of architecture. If you could imagine yourself in Washington, D.C. for a moment, just 1.5 blocks west of the White House, you come to the Octagon Museum, which is the oldest federal-style building in Washington, D.C. And you go through the front doors of this building, and behind the building, out the back door, and behind the building is a large garden, and behind that stands the 7-story headquarters of the American Institute of Architects. Here, as you enter the front door, on the right side of a large atrium space, is a black granite wall. And you look at the wall, and you see R. Buckminster Fuller, 1970. And this is the gold medal wall of the American Institute of Architects. If you turn around and you look at the staircase that goes to the second floor, you will see in the executive offices the original prototype of the tensegrity. It's about this big, and it hangs from the ceiling in a very prominent location for all to see every day. And this was a gift from Bucky. This is of course, the geodesic dome would come from the tensegrity later. And this is the dome, probably the most famous dome in the state of Illinois, at Southern Illinois University in Carbondale. What is so amazing about Bucky Fuller winning the AIA gold medal in 1970 is that he was, at that time, an architect with a small a, as opposed to a large A, because in the United States, to be an architect, you need to go to architecture school, graduate with a master's degree in architecture after 6 or 7 years, and then you're an intern for a minimum of 3 years, and then you take a week-long series of examinations, and these examinations, which are on engineering and design and structures, only 16% of the people pass the first time around. Well, Bucky Fuller became a fellow of the American Institute of Architects in 1970 when he received the gold medal, and he, at that time, became an architect with a capital A, and he met all of the qualifications, but of course he had already been such an inspiration to so many architects for such a long period of time, even prior to 1970. Now, it was his 75th birthday to the date when he received the gold medal, and also it was the 53rd anniversary. And the gold medal was given to him in Boston, and I'm going to read to you just a short description of the citation. Engineer, inventor, mathematician, educator, cartographer, philosopher, poet, author, cosmologist, industrial designer, and architect, whose ideas, once considered visionary, have now received national and international acceptance. A man responsible for the design of the strongest, lightest, and most efficient means of enclosing space yet devised by man. A man who has used himself as a laboratory of human response, who has at all times concerned himself with the social implications of his discoveries, who has understood that real wealth is energy, and a man whose objective is humanity's comprehensive success in the universe. A man of vision, a man of integrity. Some things have already been said about Bucky Fuller, the communicator. He was a profound communicator, but it was also difficult to comprehend everything that he was saying. In my times with Bucky, I discovered that the length of his presentations was sometimes subject to change based on the age of his audiences. And of course, the younger people got the most respect. And I think he had the feeling sometimes that they were picking up on his ideas faster than the adults. I remember, for example, walking with Bucky outside of this tent in the late 1970s, where he was giving little sound bites back of information to the students who were asking him questions informally. But conversely, I remember his address to the University of Minnesota Alumni Association. It was an after-dinner address in the Alumni Club, and it was to have lasted 45 minutes, but it went on for 2 hours and a quarter, long after midnight. My most memorable experience with Bucky Fuller was when he spoke at the AIA National Convention in 1981 the theme was A Line on Design and Energy. And he was a fantastic speaker at this convention and probably one of the best speeches ever given in the convention hall. But there's a secret about it that I would like to share with you. Just prior to his speech, he asked me, he said, Jim, you could help me get ready for this speech. I would like to find a quiet room here, and I would like to take a 20-minute nap. If there's a conference room available, I could sleep on the conference table. And so, as host and his chaperone, if you will, escort, we found a conference room. I helped him onto the chair and then up onto the table where he laid down, very hard table, this high, I suppose. And he said, would you come back in 20 minutes? And I stood outside. I went outside, closed the door, turned off the lights, and 20 minutes later, I came back, and his internal clock had already awakened him, and he was just getting up. And he was refreshed, and he was ready to go on to give one of his greatest speeches of all time. But to this day, and I don't take many naps during the daytime, but whenever I do, I pray for the strength that Bucky Fuller had to get that, to concentrate and to get that kind of relaxation. A real lesson in time management and a real lesson in discipline. One of the other great domes that Bucky did was the Ford Rotunda. This is in Detroit. The final thing I'd like to share with you about Bucky is that he felt that in each of us there is an architect, whether it be architect small a, architect capital A, in each of us, you and me, there's an architect, and I believe him. When he gave me his book, Critical Path, and autographed it and shook my hand, from that day forward, I felt such a strong responsibility to him and his ideas, and I will never forget the kind of influence that he had upon me as a person to help to make the right critical path decisions. And in the spirit of that, I have a short story about responsibility and about 4 people named everybody, somebody, anybody, and nobody. And I think this is particularly apropos at this conference at this time. There was a critical assignment to be done, and everybody was sure that somebody would do it. Anybody could have done it, but nobody did it. Somebody got angry about that because it was everybody's assignment. Everybody thought that anybody could do it, but nobody realized that everybody wouldn't do it. It ended up that everybody blamed somebody when nobody did what anybody could have done. Well, Bucky Fuller did his part, and he was one of the most highly energized people of the century, and his influence on architects today is very great. Thanks to Bucky, and now I think thanks to the spirit that lives on with Bucky, we know that we can help make the world a better place. Thank you.
Welcome, John Kessenberger.
We're getting a little bit late, so I'll try and rush right through all of this. Bucky touched my heart, as Tom put it, in 1969. I walked out one night in Boston to hear a lecture. I wasn't prepared for what I heard. I had been in university and listening to lectures, but what I heard was very different. He shared ideas about doing more with less, procession, ideas about domes over Manhattan, the Bucky things you would hear in a lecture. But I really came away thinking, well, this was very different. He wasn't really lecturing, he was telling stories. And he was inviting me to look and see how things work. Well, that night I went home, and it was late. It was another one of the Marathon Bucky lectures. But even though it was late, I was really charged up. And I started building my first geodesic model that night, 1969.
2 years later, this is a local story, I was in Aspen and working with Tom Crum, co-teaching math and science at a local school, wonderful school, and we put to practice some of Bucky's ideas. It was a hands-on project. We built a 22-foot dome with the students. There's Tom. You'll notice it was in the middle of winter, but we were totally fired up. It didn't matter that it was about 10 degrees. And within a few days, the students and the parents and teachers in the school had created a space outdoors in the front yard of the school in the snow that was warm enough, because it had a cover on it, to use as a classroom. And we would do all kinds of things in there, including chant in the morning. It was a wonderful experience. Not too long thereafter, Bucky came out to Windstar in 1980 and 81, and in preparation for the 82 lecture and workshop, he asked Amy Edmondson, who was working with Bucky at that time, to send a letter over to Windstar. He wanted to build a dome that hadn't been built yet, a 6-frequency, as he put it, deresonated tensegrity 5/8 truncation. And that made perfect sense when you thought of it. Once you had learned the language that Bucky was speaking. But it hadn't been tried yet, but instead of making a little model, he wanted to make a big model, a 45-foot diameter model. So Amy sent along some drawings and chord lengths, and I prepared for the workshop, cut all these struts. Everything was all set. The next day, 120 people were going to take a workshop and build a 45-foot building. Well, we started out and very soon realized that there was a problem, that there was something wrong. And we actually stayed up all night figuring out what was wrong. And we found that by using a hinge, we could solve the problem that was in the math of the dome. And for showtime, the next day, the workshop, we were able to then work with the group and build this dome. However, there was that flaw, and it was kind of nagging at us. Why didn't the math work out quite right? Well, the essence of the lesson was that we had something to dig out, and that it wasn't going to be okay to stay with a building that had this flaw in it. And it took a while to sink in, because there was all the excitement of creating something. But after it sunk in, we realized that what had to happen was that this dome had to come down. And we had to start over. We had to find out what was underneath the problem. And I think the lesson there was to stop. That was basically what Bucky said. Stop. Figure out what's going on, and then take it from there. Well, he left to Chicago after this workshop. He never really saw it complete. We talked on the phone, and he said, well, figure it out. You can do it. So we did. It took a while. Amy worked hard on it for many months, and we all did. And the Biodome project at Windstar is the result. We built a small dome, and then with that knowledge and an understanding of the math and the 6 frequency, then built the 50-foot dome at Windstar. And it was perfect in terms of what we were looking for, and the parallel geometry, the beauty of the geometry shone through. I think the lesson was well learned. Bucky really was into trying things out. Don't listen to your teachers. Try things out. I think that the lesson that also came through very strong, right from the very first lecture I heard in '69, was look to nature. You can look lots of places, but look to nature. And from that, see what you can find out about how the universe works. And that gift, and many others, are the wonderful world of Buckminster Fuller to me. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Religion, politics, all of us, I guess, try to change people and their behaviors. Buckminster Fuller contended that you don't change people, you change the environment, and people will change to reflect that environment.
Spoke yesterday The very obvious fact that at 32 years of age and a couple of billion human beings on our planet, that I would not get anywhere just trying to reform people, ask them to behave better. And I felt that this is what politics does, religions do, but some of it, I could be, there's a possibility of being effective by trying to solve all problems that I saw by producing artifacts that would alter the environment and make the environment favorable to people behaving more effectively, more considerately of one another. So artifacts are the very essence and
one such environment-altering person, acknowledged by Architectural Digest as one of the top 100 architects in the world, is Steve Conger. Steve worked closely with Bucky, having been with Windstar since the beginning. Please welcome Steve Conger.
I'd like to make this really short. I was thinking what anecdote to mention about Bucky, and there's a lot of them. The one that's probably the most apropos now is I was 22 years old walking in the field right outside this tent in 1972, I guess it was. And I saw 3 people out there in the field with a pile of boards, some pipes, and some stainless steel strap. And I walked over to them and I said, "What are you doing?" And they said, "We're building an elliptical dome for Buckminster Fuller's talk at the Aspen Design Conference." And I'd read about domes and I didn't know much, but I thought it sounded fascinating. So I said, "Can I help you put this up?" And it took the 4 of us one day to put up a 60-foot diameter elliptical dome, which was remarkable in itself. And at the end of the day, we hung a tent from the inside of the dome. And I went home and feeling that something magical and wonderful had happened to me. And I came the next morning to see the work that we'd accomplished, and there were 25 people had slept under the dome that night. And I understood at that point something really basic about shelter, and what Bucky was talking about wasn't just mathematical formulas, but it was an actual tools for humans to be able to live on the planet differently. And I learned a lot from Bucky over a long time, and I struggled my way through synergetics. But the thing about Bucky that got me the most, and I think it's reflected by a lot of the people that have talked here, Jamie's mentioned it, was that Bucky was a deeply spiritual man of great faith. And I think we have a little clip about that, where he talks about faith.
I said, if I'm then doing what nature would like done to make humans a success, I might find I get on. But I'd have to have then, as I said to you earlier, I developed absolute faith in the greater intellect operating here that designed all these things. So that I am here after 53 years, you're listening to me tonight. It's to do with my absolute faith in this greater intellect. The integrity, the word God is much too inadequate, and it tends to suggest a human being, some kind of that kind of God. But quite clearly, when you discover that human beings, 60% water, and water freezes and boils in very small limits, God, like you and I, couldn't operate in Mars. So that's all nonsense, that way of thinking. So anyway, my faith is in, I like what the Indians said. They had some great spirit. They must have been doing a whole lot of thinking before they came to the great spirit. This is anything but immature thinking. It's very mature thinking. And I want to end tonight by coming back to how much we tend to think we're responsible for the universe.
The Great Spirit. Bucky, throughout his life, rewrote the Lord's Prayer several times. And so it meant there were some parts of it I think he didn't like. I think I think he thought there was some bargaining going on in some of it. And anyway, so this is Buckminster Fuller's Lord's Prayer. Because of all the studying that I did and all the lectures that I heard, one time I heard in this tent Bucky read this Lord's Prayer, and it seemed to me the essence of who he was. O God, our Father, who art in He even, omni-experience is your identity. You have given us overwhelmingly manifestation of your complete knowledge, your complete comprehension, your complete wisdom, your complete concern, your complete competence, your complete effectiveness, your complete love and compassion, your complete forgiveness, giveness, and post-giveness, your complete inspiration giving, your complete evolutionary sagacity, your complete power, will, initiative, and absolute timing of all realization. Yours, dear God, is the only and complete glory. You are the universal integrity. The eternal integrity is you. We thank you with all our hearts, souls, and mind. Amen.
We are tremendously locked society up by the completely misinforming education system. And that's why synergetics, to give you your own first-hand experiment, find out what an oval shape and why. So I want you to understand why I press synergetics so hard. Nothing has given me the confidence to, in 53 years of not being supported by the system, having some loving, nice things happen, I have art shows, things like that, but meantime my wife has to eat. and I have to make her happy to dare to go along with God. You know? There's been some tough times, and all through it, nothing has given me confidence like that I really know about triangulation and not squaring. I know what I'm talking about. Wow. It's very important to know what you're talking about. So I'd like to help you learn to be enormous confidence in what you're talking about.
Gave Bucky the confidence was an understanding of the mathematical coordinate system of universe, or Great Spirit. He called it synergetics. One of the acknowledged authorities on synergetics is Amy Edmondson. Amy was Bucky's research engineer for the last 3 years of his life. She is the author of A Fuller Explanation, the Synergetic Geometry of Buckminster Fuller. She is currently in the Organizational Behavioral Program at Harvard Business School. Please welcome Amy.
I love that last line. Is it on? That last line, he wanted us all to have the confidence to know what we're talking about. Well, the story I want to tell, he just said he felt synergetics would give us that confidence. Synergetics, big word for a bunch of geometric principles that he thought told us how nature made structuring decisions, how nature put things together. So a triangle holds its shape, pretty simple. Take that and many more, pretty soon you've got a geodesic dome. So Bucky thought it was really an important experience for people to have that hands-on educational experience of building something. So you've seen other people tonight talk about building domes and that kind of experiences. But I just want to tell a quick story about Bucky Fuller as an empowering person, empowering educator. I've been working for him for about 8 months, and actually what all these tapes that we're seeing tonight have come from, it was a week-long program in California, and Bucky was scheduled to lecture for a total of 6 days. And up until the time we took off to fly to California, we'd been working very hard on some calculations for really his latest dome, the dome that later became the biodome. But this is about a year before John Katzenberger's story. And so I'd been working about 5 months on these calculations, and finally in California, just after landing, was about to put the final struts in the model. And Bucky was watching me, through those big lenses, those beautiful eyes, very carefully, and I was very nervous. This is the model. And I wasn't quite sure it would come together because it was the first time to confirm months of mathematics. Put it together, he's watching carefully, and I'm thinking, okay, good. Now we're going to celebrate. He'll think of some wonderful way to celebrate, and I will spend the next 6 days listening to him, learning, having a wonderful time. So he nods, inspects the model, says, very good. Now, tomorrow we'll build the full scale 25-footer. I was really too stunned to speak, and all sorts of things started going on inside my head. I thought, he doesn't really get it. We can't do that here. These people are here with felt tip pens, ready to take notes, ready to listen, not with band saws and drill presses. And I said, my mind was going crazy, thinking, how am I going to explain this to him? I began to think his 86 years were catching up with him. And
Protected by behavior of parts. And quite clearly to me, the universe was synergetic. There was nothing in one atom per se that predicted another atom. There was nothing in an atom per se predicted chemical compounding. There was nothing in chemical compounding per se that predicted biological protoplasm. There was nothing in biological protoplasm per se that predicted camel and palm tree and the respiratory exchange of gases between the two. I saw that the complex was never being explained by the simplex. So if I really wanted to know anything, I was going to have to start with the most complex, which meant I said, I've got to start with the universe. So that I found to be just exactly the opposite of the way we teach human beings. The child asks the question, he wants to understand the universe. But you say, Don, wait to get to school, and they'll ask you, and they get to school, they say, Don, never bound about the universe, I'll give you 1 and a 2 and a 3. If you can handle that, I'll give you 4, 5, and 6. We call it elementary school, put you in elements, break you up into parts. So I saw this was really, our whole education system seemed to be contrary to the scheme of the design of human beings, the way we're supposed to acquire information. Now, this I found had many, many very debilitating effects on humans and their effectiveness in the world.
So what he's saying is fractionating our children, breaking their natural quest to understand the universe into elements, contrary to the natural scheme of humans. That's education. One of the things that disturbed Bucky the most was what he called the lies. His word, strong word, that we continue to teach our children with the current educational system. I'll give you a short example. Think back to when you were in school. Try to remember the big wall map that was used to teach us geography. It became, to many of us, our only worldview.
What is that? Tell me. What are you looking at? Mercator map. It's a Mercator map of the world. I took this from the high school wall in New York a couple of years ago. But you go to all the high schools, you still see this. This is the map. It's the classic map of the world. On it, Greenland is bigger than South America. North America is bigger than Africa. And we give this to the children. This is the truth itself. This I'm going to teach you at school. Can you imagine such? How can you justify such misinformation? In practical matters to lie to your child? That's what you're doing? Wow!
Peter Meisen is co-founder of SHARE, the largest private food distribution program in North America, and is founder of GENIE, the Global Energy Network International. So please welcome Peter Meisen.
If the Mercator projection was the lie, I'd like to show you the truth. This is the Dymaxion globe. It's an icosahedron, a 20-sided equilateral polygon. the maximum distortion of 2% at any one location. If you unfold it in a particular way, you have the most accurate flat projection of the world you've ever seen. On the right, you see the Western Hemisphere. On the left, the Eastern Hemisphere. It shows us as an east-west world, not an east-west world, but a north-south world, a one-world nation in a one-world island. We're not separated, we are all connected. Exactly what we've been saying here this week. Bucky was a global design scientist, and using this map 2 decades ago, he gave us a global plan, his #1 solution for most of the problems of the planet. Greenhouse gases and acid rain, hunger and overpopulation, deforestation and topsoil loss, nuclear power, and even war. I saw Bucky speak 2 times in my life, and I really didn't understand anything he said. But I knew it was profound, and I was moved by the experience. 6 years ago, I finally got around to reading his book, Critical Path. I was in the process of looking at what was the next project in my life. I was in that question, what's next? What am I going to do next? And on page 206, he said that the #1 priority for the planet was linking the global electric energy grid all the way around. It was the answer to my question, and it scared me to death. Because it was way too big, and who was I to take on this project? Well, the global grid, what it is literally linking the electric power lines all the way around the planet. If you link time zones east to west, you can even out the peaks and valleys. If you link seasonal variations north and south, because you have a summer and a winter planet, there are different demand patterns between the north and the south. All of a sudden you can move electric power from where it's cheap and abundant, renewable, to where we need it, where the cities and the industrial systems are. This proposal stayed in the expert literature for about 20 years. Never really rose to the surface. 6 weeks ago in Canada, up in Winnipeg, we had an international conference. We brought 36 experts from around the world to really check this out for the very first time. And this is what they said. They said that that global system is not quite doable yet. It's a little bit too far for our technology to go, but what we can do today is link international and interregional systems all the way around the planet. And the benefits are enormous. Economically, it's a massive win-win relationship, because if I've got excess energy, I can sell it to my neighbor, and if I have a need, I can buy it from my neighbor. A massive win-win relationship. Technically, the boys said we can do it. Now, what was real interesting is 20 years ago, Bucky said the maximum distance was 1,500 miles. Today, that maximum distance is 4,000 miles. And a little bit earlier, you had John talking about doing more with less. This is exactly what he was speaking about. Environmentally, they basically said there would be less pollution. If you can buy remote renewable power, there will be less greenhouse gas and less acid rain. For the people in the third world countries, which right now burn firewood for their heating and their cooking, all of a sudden they wouldn't have to do that. They'd have another option, so there would be less forests being cut down and less topsoil erosion. And lastly, they said that we could move away from nuclear power. And the last group, socio-political group, said that the more you link like this, the more you trade with your neighbor, the more cooperation you have more mutual stability, more security, more peace on the planet. There were 2 recommendations that they gave. First one was that we need to educate, debate, and discuss this proposal all the way around the planet. And that's what we're doing here right now. And the second thing that we needed to do was to take this to the United Nations Secretary General. And we started that process today by giving a copy of that report to Noel Brown. So Bucky said, look at what needs to be done and do that. Thanks very much.
We're getting there. Earlier today, you heard the eloquent remarks of Robert Kiyosaki, who also wants to pay a short tribute to Buckminster Fuller. Please welcome again Robert Kiyosaki.
Two and a half years ago, I was with John Denver in Sydney, Australia, and we're riding in a car together. And it was actually the first time in my life I actually had an opportunity to speak with John on a one-to-one personal basis, and he was sort of trapped in the car with me, and he had no choice. And he was saying about, he was recalling the first time he ever met Bucky, and he said, I think he talked about earlier, he says, they spent several hours speaking of love and how their lives added to this planet. And I said, that's really different. The first time I ever met Bucky, he scolded me for 10 minutes, you know. And what he scolded me about was the fact that I was a greedy businessman. And I was into this planet just to see what was in it for me. So what I'm going to roll here is, the thing was, when Bucky scolded me, I was at this event called Kirkwood 10 years ago, almost to this month. It was an event that changed my life. It turned me around 180 degrees. And what he was talking to me about here is the difference between money and wealth. So I'd like to run this section real quick right here. So would you run that, Randy, please?
I demonstrate what is wealth. Wealth combines the physical and the metaphysical, the mind capability and the physical capabilities. The physical consists entirely of energy associated with matter, energy associated with radiation. One convertible with the other. We know that no energy can be created, no energy can be lost, so the energy content of wealth cannot be lost. The metaphysical, the know-how side, every time you make an experiment, you always learn more, you can't learn less. You may have learned that it doesn't work. That saves a lot of your time from now on. Know-how always and only increases, and the physical cannot decrease. So wealth can only increase. Wealth can only increase. Now, by wealth I mean the organized capability to employ principles by virtue of our mind, understanding principles, what we've actually organized and accomplished in the way of taking care of how many lives for how many forward days, both protecting them, nurturing them, accommodating them, educating them. To what extent we organize our circumstances to take care of how many human beings, how many forward days. Okay? I see that what's going on right today, and very, very powerful in the last, it's going on particularly in this century, we've separated money from wealth. We're playing games with money and been able to downgrade the wealth.
So what is wealth? Who knows what wealth is? It's the ability to survive, improve our survivability number of days forward. That's what wealth is. So what Bucky also says, in life you either make money or you make sense, but they're mutually exclusive. And so let me ask you this. When the foresters go and clear our forest out, they're taking away our future. Does that make any sense? No. Basically, they're clearing away our wealth. And he says that if you would use your mind and nurture that forest would grow and it would add to the survivability of planet, all of us going forward. Does that make sense? Yes, if we took forward, then we could all live further. But if you look at it, it was businessmen, like I do use the gender men, like me, who came in it, and all I asked for this planet was what was in it for me? How much could I take from it? And so when I started to observe what Bucky said, again, was Malthusian economics and all this, he looked at is that Malthusian economics justified men like me to be greedy. So if you look at it right now, the United States could feed more people if our government did not pay them money not to grow. Is that correct? Does it make sense to pay our farmers money to not grow? No, and people are what? Dying. 35,000 children will die today of hunger or hunger-related diseases because of greed and the need for money. I was in Australia I go to Australia about 3 or 4 times a year. Australia this year has shot 60 million sheep. Think about it. Can you imagine? Can you imagine how many sheep 60 million sheep are? Why do you think they shot 60 million sheep? To keep the price of what? Wool high. And meanwhile, Albania is sending thousands of people over to Italy because they're starving to death. And on top of that, here's one of our greatest leaders of our time, my time especially, a man named Mikhail Gorbachev. His country is starving. Here's one of the greatest friends, allies for peace on planet Earth. His people are starving, and do we send them any money? Or, I mean, any food? No. Does that make sense? No. So as Bucky says, we're playing games with money or wealth. Now, for me, in summary, and we have one last clip, I'd just like to share this much. The name of this conference is Choices. 10 years ago, I left that conference, and I had to make a choice. After Bucky scolded me, I hated what he said to me, but in my heart, I knew what he said was true. I was a greedy, greedy man. And I vowed when I left there, I said, I'm going out and I'm going to make a difference. The trouble is, when you go out in the real world, how many people realize the real world is not in this tent right now? Right? How many people realize it will take some courage to operate with integrity? And what Bucky describes as integrity is not be selfish. How many people realize it will take some courage? Yes, thank you. Well, I went out in the real world, my courage diminished immediately. And even though I swore I'd work for wealth and not money, it took me going to one of my factories in Korea to inspect one of my production runs out there. And I went in and I was looking at inventory and all this, and I was cruising around of all these workers. And I said, where's your silk screening? Where do you silk screen? They said, upstairs. I said, let me go see that. And I walked upstairs, and they had crammed young boys into a space where these young boys were sitting like this, and they had another shelf above it with another young boy above it, and they had a little table here, and the boys were silk screening like this, inhaling the paint. And I stood there looking at it, and I realized that, again, I was put in a position where I was killing. I was killing that young boy in the name of me making some what? Money. And I realized I'd broken my vow and all this, and I left that factory in Korea, and that was about 1983, and I decided I couldn't do it anymore. And as Crum says, eventually you just take this leap. So in 1985, I took the leap, and I swore I would never ever work for money again, and all I would do was do my best to increase wealth on planet Earth. It's been one of the best decisions I ever made in my life. And it was frightening, and it was worth it, and it was scary. But if it hadn't been for this man named Dr. Buckminster Fuller, and for men and for other people and women that support me and all this, I wouldn't be up here on the stage if Bucky hadn't given me the opportunity to find some courage. So I'd like to leave you with this thought right now. The name of this 3 days or 2 days is Choices. And where do you think the greatest wealth lies right now? The greatest wealth for the sustainability of planet Earth now lies with you, and it lies with me. The greatest wealth lies in our people. And whether or not we choose to increase the wealth on this planet is now up to us. And I'll leave it with you as this: the choice is up to me, and it's also up to you. And I'll say the biggest difference for me is this: when I looked at that little boy, the worst thing about looking at that little boy is I could no longer look at myself in the mirror. And whether you make the choice or not to go over it, the worst thing about life is that only you can live with yourself. And I will say this much: Bucky didn't say this, but it was my definition of this. The definition of greed is this: greed is when you do not give the gift God gave you to give. And so I'd like to play the last clip right here is a clip on integrity. And it's what one person can do. What can you do right now? And so
individuals say to me, what can I do? What can I do? I'm just a little tiny guy. And I say, what you can do I'm repeating something I've said to you earlier, that we are really in the final examination. I did get last night to you where we function in the universe, and we're here for local universe information gathering, and local problem solving in support of the integrity of an eternally regenerative universe. But integrity is the essence. In an invisible world, there's no visible aesthetics. In an invisible world, the only aesthetic is integrity. And that great computer world we're going into. So I simply say, I'm really confronting you with very, I've lived through all that because I was a comprehensive, I kept the records. That's the only reason I'm able to say the things to you I'm able to. I've given you a very faithful record of what's going on economically. So I simply say, what you can do personally is commit yourself to what it is the truth, that's all. You have to remember that we didn't design the universe and we're not running the universe. And you have to really give credit to the, I like what the Indians say, the Great Spirit. The word God tends to infer a human being's form. So to say the Great Spirit, but if we realize that I don't mean anthropomorphic when I say God, but if you operate with integrity, God wants to know right now whether human beings have the courage to go along with their own minds, or you have to go along with the crowd. You got to get into the game. We're going to dare. If we really dare to go with our minds, we'll stay here. We'll go on into a entirely new era of humanity. It will not be a matter of earning a living. We'll be doing what you see needs to be done because you feel that you want to do it. You want to qualify to be able to serve one another. And nothing, you have no question at all about earning living. Anyway, personally then, here we got 2 minutes of this session. It comes back to each one of you, just as the numbers multiply, of individuals who are really going to commit themselves to integrity, whatever the truth may be, and really commit themselves to making all humanity a success. You have to ask yourself the question, you know, if my reflex is so conditioned that I resent somebody else enjoying himself? Am I really willing to really love my humanity, my fellows? That's it. So if you do that, we will win. If you can do it, if it's spontaneously arousable in you to operate with integrity and really go along to love comprehensively. That's it.
Waiting for a track. I would like to ask you to join me in thanking some people who have had everything to do with our symposium this weekend. Randolph Kraft, who edited all of the Buckminster Fuller footage.